The coded telegram arrived at Italian intelligence headquarters in Rome on a humid August morning in 1943, its contents so extraordinary that Colonel Alessandro Moretti read it 3 times before believing what his eyes were telling him. His best operative in North Africa, Agent Falco, had been tracking American supply lines for months, meticulously documenting ammunition shipments, fuel deliveries, and food rations. But this latest report contained a detail that seemed almost too absurd to be true. American forces were receiving massive shipments of a dark, fizzy beverage called Coca-Cola, not as an occasional treat, but as a standard military supply, delivered by the millions of bottles to troops fighting in the desert. Moretti set down the telegram and walked to his office window, gazing out at the ancient streets of Rome, where citizens queued for their meager rations of bread and olive oil. The contrast was staggering. While Italian families struggled to find enough food to survive, their American enemies were apparently so wealthy, so abundant in resources, that they could afford to ship luxury beverages across thousands of miles of ocean to soldiers in combat zones. It was a revelation that would fundamentally challenge everything Italian intelligence believed about their enemies' capabilities and priorities. What Colonel Moretti couldn't have known was that he was witnessing the early stages of one of the most remarkable logistical achievements in military history. The Coca-Cola Company's wartime operation would eventually deliver over 10 billion bottles of their signature beverage to American servicemen around the globe, creating a supply chain so vast and efficient that it would become a symbol of American industrial might and a source of profound psychological warfare against Axis forces who could barely comprehend such abundance. The story of Coca-Cola's wartime expansion begins not in the boardrooms of Atlanta, but in the trenches and foxholes where American soldiers first began expressing their homesickness through a simple craving for the taste of home. As early as 1941, before America's official entry into the war, military commanders were receiving letters from troops stationed overseas requesting shipments of familiar American products. Among the most frequently mentioned items was Coca-Cola, the carbonated soft drink that had become synonymous with American culture and the carefree lifestyle that soldiers were fighting to preserve. Robert Woodruff, the visionary president of the Coca-Cola Company, recognized an opportunity that went far beyond simple profit margins. In December 1941, just days after Pearl Harbor, Woodruff made a declaration that would transform his company and astonish the world. "We will see that every man in uniform gets a bottle of Coca-Cola for 5 cents, wherever he is and whatever it costs the company." This wasn't just corporate patriotism. It was a strategic decision that would turn a soft drink company into an essential component of America's war machine. The magnitude of this commitment was staggering. American forces would eventually be deployed to every continent except Antarctica, from the frozen airfields of Alaska to the steaming jungles of the Pacific Islands. Delivering a perishable beverage to millions of soldiers scattered across the globe would require a logistical network more complex than many military operations, involving specialized equipment, trained personnel, and transportation resources that would have to compete with ammunition and medical supplies for precious cargo space. Italian intelligence operatives, trained to look for military weaknesses and strategic vulnerabilities, initially dismissed reports of Coca-Cola shipments as propaganda or misinformation. The idea that a nation at war would dedicate valuable resources to shipping luxury beverages seemed so irrational that it had to be some kind of elaborate deception. Agent Falco's first reports from North Africa were met with skepticism from his handlers in Rome, who assumed he had misunderstood what he was observing or had been fed false information by American counterintelligence. But as more reports arrived from different theaters of operation, the evidence became impossible to ignore. Italian spies in London reported seeing American soldiers drinking Coca-Cola in pubs and restaurants throughout the city. Operatives in the Mediterranean observed American supply ships unloading cases of the distinctive bottles alongside ammunition and medical supplies. Most shocking of all, captured American soldiers carried empty Coca-Cola bottles as personal mementos, treating them with the same reverence that Italian soldiers might reserve for religious artifacts or family photographs. The psychological impact of these observations on Italian intelligence was profound. For a nation that had been struggling with shortages and rationing since the beginning of the war, the sight of enemies treating luxury beverages as routine military supplies was deeply demoralizing. It suggested an enemy with resources so vast that they could afford to waste precious cargo space on non-essential items, an industrial capacity so enormous that producing millions of bottles of soft drinks was merely a footnote in their war production statistics. Agent Falco's detailed reports from the North African campaign painted a picture that seemed almost fantastical to his superiors in Rome. American soldiers, he observed, consumed Coca-Cola not just during rest periods, but even in forward positions, sharing bottles with wounded comrades and using the distinctive green glass as impromptu signaling devices. The beverage had become so integrated into American military culture that its absence was noted and complained about in soldiers' letters home, while its presence was celebrated as a tangible connection to the civilian life they were fighting to preserve. The logistical challenges of the Coca-Cola operation were mind-boggling in their complexity. The company had to establish bottling plants in war zones, train military personnel to operate specialized equipment, and create distribution networks that could function under enemy fire. In North Africa, Coca-Cola technicians worked alongside combat engineers to establish bottling facilities just miles from the front lines, using local water sources and improvised equipment to produce thousands of bottles daily for thirsty American troops. The security implications of this operation were equally staggering. Every Coca-Cola shipment had to be protected from enemy attack, every bottling plant had to be defended against sabotage, and every distribution point had to be secured against infiltration. The company's personnel, many of them civilian employees who had volunteered for overseas service, found themselves operating in active combat zones, dodging artillery shells and air raids while maintaining production schedules that would have been challenging in peacetime factories. Italian military analysts struggled to understand the strategic logic behind such an enormous commitment of resources to what seemed like a frivolous luxury. Their own military doctrine emphasized austerity and sacrifice, with soldiers expected to endure hardships without complaint and to find motivation in ideology rather than comfort. The American approach, which seemed to prioritize soldier morale and psychological well-being over pure military efficiency, represented a fundamentally different philosophy of warfare that Italian commanders found difficult to comprehend. The cultural implications of the Coca-Cola phenomenon were equally puzzling to Italian observers. In fascist Italy, individual desires were supposed to be subordinated to collective needs, and personal comfort was considered less important than national glory. The American military's apparent willingness to cater to soldiers' cravings for familiar beverages suggested a democratic approach to warfare that prioritized individual satisfaction alongside military objectives. This represented a challenge to fascist ideology that went far beyond simple military tactics. The economic dimensions of the Coca-Cola operation were perhaps the most shocking aspect for Italian intelligence analysts. The cost of shipping millions of bottles across oceans, establishing bottling plants in war zones, and maintaining distribution networks in combat areas represented an expenditure that would have bankrupted most nations. Yet the Americans seemed to treat these costs as routine business expenses, suggesting an economy so robust that it could simultaneously fund massive military operations and luxury beverage distribution without apparent strain. The technological innovations required for the Coca-Cola operation also impressed and alarmed Italian observers. The company had developed portable bottling equipment that could be transported by ship and aircraft, water purification systems that could operate in primitive conditions, and refrigeration units that could function in desert heat and tropical humidity. These technologies, originally designed for soft drink production, had obvious military applications that Italian engineers studied with great interest and growing concern. The propaganda value of Coca-Cola distribution was not lost on Italian intelligence analysts, who recognized that the beverage had become a powerful symbol of American abundance and technological superiority. Every bottle consumed by an American soldier was a reminder of the industrial capacity and economic strength that supported the Allied war effort. More troubling still, captured Italian soldiers reported being offered Coca-Cola by their American captors, experiencing firsthand the abundance that their enemies took for granted. The human stories behind the Coca-Cola operation were equally revealing to Italian observers. American soldiers wrote home about sharing bottles with British allies, French resistance fighters, and even former enemies who had surrendered. These accounts, intercepted by Italian intelligence, painted a picture of an enemy that combined military efficiency with humanitarian concern, using luxury beverages as tools of diplomacy and psychological warfare. The medical aspects of Coca-Cola distribution also caught the attention of Italian military doctors, who noted that American forces seemed to suffer fewer cases of dehydration and heat exhaustion in desert conditions. While the beverage's caffeine content provided obvious benefits for alertness and morale, its role in maintaining fluid intake among troops operating in extreme conditions represented a practical military advantage that Italian forces, limited to water and occasional wine rations, could not match. The industrial espionage opportunities presented by the Coca-Cola operation were not overlooked by Italian intelligence services. Agents were tasked with obtaining samples of the beverage for chemical analysis, studying the company's production methods, and attempting to reverse engineer the formula that had become so important to American military morale. These efforts, while ultimately unsuccessful, provided valuable intelligence about American industrial capabilities and quality control standards. The social dynamics of Coca-Cola consumption among American troops also fascinated Italian observers, who noted that the beverage seemed to transcend military rank and regional differences. Officers and enlisted men shared bottles without regard for hierarchy, while soldiers from different American states bonded over their common appreciation for the familiar taste. This democratic aspect of American military culture, symbolized by equal access to Coca-Cola, represented a stark contrast to the rigid hierarchies that characterized Italian and German forces. The environmental challenges of the Coca-Cola operation were equally impressive to Italian military engineers, who marveled at the company's ability to maintain quality standards under extreme conditions. Bottling plants operated successfully in desert heat that exceeded 120 degrees Fahrenheit, in tropical humidity that rusted equipment within days, and in Arctic conditions that froze conventional beverages solid. The technological solutions developed to overcome these challenges demonstrated an engineering capability that had obvious applications beyond soft drink production. The timing of Coca-Cola deliveries also revealed sophisticated logistical planning that impressed Italian military analysts. Shipments arrived at forward positions with remarkable regularity, suggesting supply chain management capabilities that surpassed many military operations. The coordination required to synchronize beverage deliveries with ammunition resupply and medical evacuation demonstrated a level of organizational efficiency that Italian forces struggling with their own supply problems could only envy. As 1943 progressed and Italian forces faced increasing pressure on multiple fronts, the psychological impact of American abundance became increasingly demoralizing for Italian troops and civilians alike. Reports of enemy soldiers enjoying luxury beverages while Italian families struggled to find basic necessities created a stark contrast that undermined confidence in ultimate victory. The Coca-Cola phenomenon had become more than a curiosity. It was a symbol of the fundamental imbalance between Axis and Allied resources. But the most shocking revelations about the Coca-Cola operation were yet to come, as Italian intelligence began to uncover the true scope of the company's wartime expansion and the staggering numbers that would ultimately define one of the most remarkable corporate military partnerships in history. By the winter of 1943, Colonel Alessandro Moretti's intelligence files on the American Coca-Cola operation had grown to fill an entire cabinet, each folder containing reports that seemed to defy the laws of military logistics and economic reality. The numbers his agents were reporting had escalated beyond anything he could have imagined when that first telegram arrived from North Africa. Agent Falco's latest dispatch from the Italian front contained figures that made Moretti question his operative's sanity. American forces were now receiving over 5 million bottles of Coca-Cola per month in the Mediterranean theater alone, with similar quantities flowing to every other combat zone where American troops were deployed. The scale of the operation had become so vast that Italian intelligence was forced to create an entirely new classification system just to track it. What had begun as a curiosity mentioned in routine surveillance reports had evolved into a major intelligence priority, with dedicated analysts studying shipping manifests, production schedules, and distribution patterns that revealed the true magnitude of American industrial capacity. The Coca-Cola Company had essentially created a parallel military supply chain that operated with the efficiency of a major government agency and the resources of a small nation. The breakthrough in understanding came when Agent Aquila, operating undercover in Switzerland, managed to obtain detailed shipping records from a neutral port where American supply vessels regularly docked for refueling. The documents revealed a logistical network that spanned the globe, with Coca-Cola bottling plants operating in over 60 countries and territories, many of them established specifically to serve American military forces. The company had built what amounted to the world's first truly global manufacturing and distribution system, using the war as an opportunity to expand into markets that would have taken decades to penetrate under normal circumstances. The human cost of maintaining this operation was staggering in its own right. The Coca-Cola Company had deployed over 5,000 civilian employees to war zones around the world, many of them volunteers who had left comfortable jobs in American factories to operate bottling equipment under enemy fire. These Coca-Cola colonels, as they came to be known, held military rank and wore uniforms, but their mission was to maintain soft drink production rather than engage in combat. Italian intelligence analysts marveled at a society that could spare thousands of skilled workers for what seemed like a luxury operation, while simultaneously maintaining the industrial production necessary to supply a global war effort. The technological innovations required for the global Coca-Cola operation had pushed American engineering capabilities to new heights. The company had developed portable bottling plants that could be assembled in 48 hours, water purification systems that could process thousands of gallons daily from any available source, and refrigeration units that operated efficiently in climates ranging from Arctic tundra to tropical rainforest. These advances, originally designed for beverage production, had obvious military applications that Italian engineers studied with growing alarm and admiration. Agent Falco's reports from the Italian campaign provided increasingly detailed accounts of how deeply Coca-Cola had penetrated American military culture. He observed that the beverage had become a form of currency among Allied forces, with bottles traded for cigarettes, chocolate, and other scarce commodities. More significantly, he noted that American soldiers used Coca-Cola as a diplomatic tool, offering bottles to Italian civilians as gestures of goodwill and to resistance fighters as symbols of American abundance and reliability. The soft drink had become an instrument of psychological warfare that was perhaps more effective than traditional propaganda. The medical implications of mass Coca-Cola consumption among American troops also caught the attention of Italian military doctors, who began studying the beverage's effects on soldier performance and morale. While the caffeine content provided obvious benefits for alertness during long operations, Italian physicians were puzzled by reports that American soldiers seemed to maintain higher energy levels and better hydration than their Axis counterparts, even under similar combat conditions. The sugar content of Coca-Cola, they theorized, might be providing a quick energy source that gave American troops a subtle but significant advantage in sustained operations. The economic intelligence gathered about the Coca-Cola operation revealed aspects of American wartime production that fundamentally challenged Italian understanding of capitalist economics. Rather than being forced to choose between military necessities and civilian luxuries, the American economy seemed capable of producing both simultaneously and in unprecedented quantities. The resources devoted to Coca-Cola production, sugar, glass, metal caps, transportation, and labor, represented a commitment that would have required most nations to sacrifice other essential production. Yet American military supplies showed no evidence of shortages or compromises. The global reach of the Coca-Cola network became apparent as Italian intelligence compiled reports from agents operating in different theaters of war. In the Pacific, the company had established floating bottling plants aboard specially converted ships that could serve island garrisons where land-based facilities were impossible. In Europe, mobile bottling units followed advancing American armies, setting up production within days of capturing new territory. In North Africa, the company had negotiated agreements with local suppliers to source ingredients, creating economic relationships that strengthened American influence in regions far from the traditional spheres of Western corporate activity. The propaganda value of the Coca-Cola operation extended far beyond its immediate military applications. Italian intelligence analysts noted that the beverage had become a symbol of American culture that was recognized and desired by civilians throughout occupied Europe. Resistance fighters requested Coca-Cola as proof of American commitment to liberation, while collaborators sought access to the beverage as evidence of their connections to the occupying forces. The soft drink had become a form of soft power that influenced political relationships and cultural attitudes in ways that traditional military force could not achieve. The security measures surrounding Coca-Cola production and distribution also impressed Italian military observers, who recognized the sophisticated planning required to protect such a vast and vulnerable network. Every bottling plant was defended against sabotage, every shipment was guarded against theft, and every distribution point was secured against infiltration. The company had essentially created a private army of security personnel who operated alongside regular military forces, adding another layer of complexity to an already remarkable logistical achievement. The quality control standards maintained by Coca-Cola under wartime conditions demonstrated American industrial capabilities that Italian manufacturers could barely comprehend. Despite operating in primitive conditions with improvised equipment and untrained local labor, the company maintained consistent taste, carbonation, and purity standards that matched peacetime production. This attention to detail in non-essential production suggested manufacturing capabilities and quality control systems that had obvious applications to military equipment and weapons production. The environmental challenges overcome by the Coca-Cola operation showcased American engineering ingenuity in ways that impressed even hostile observers. In the Aleutian Islands, the company developed heating systems that prevented beverages from freezing in subarctic conditions. In the South Pacific, they created cooling systems that maintained product quality in tropical heat and humidity. In North Africa, they solved water purification problems that had challenged military engineers, creating systems that could produce potable water from virtually any source. The cultural impact of Coca-Cola distribution among Allied forces also caught the attention of Italian anthropologists and sociologists working for military intelligence. The beverage seemed to serve as a unifying force among troops from different nations, with British, Canadian, Australian and Free French soldiers all expressing appreciation for American generosity in sharing their national beverage. This cultural diplomacy, conducted through soft drink distribution, created bonds between Allied forces that strengthened military cooperation and political relationships. The timing and coordination of Coca-Cola deliveries revealed logistical planning capabilities that surpassed many military operations in their complexity and efficiency. Italian intelligence analysts noted that beverage shipments arrived at forward positions with remarkable regularity, often coordinated with ammunition, resupply, and medical evacuation schedules. The ability to synchronize luxury deliveries with essential military supplies demonstrated organizational capabilities that had obvious applications to combat operations and strategic planning. The psychological warfare aspects of the Coca-Cola operation became increasingly apparent as Italian intelligence gathered more detailed reports from different theaters. American forces deliberately shared the beverage with prisoners of war, demonstrating abundance and generosity that contrasted sharply with Axis treatment of captives. This strategy was particularly effective with Italian prisoners who were accustomed to scarcity and rationing and who often expressed amazement at their captors' willingness to share luxury items with enemies. The industrial espionage opportunities presented by the global Coca-Cola network were not overlooked by Italian intelligence services, who recognized that the company's operations provided unprecedented access to American manufacturing techniques and quality control procedures. Agents were tasked with studying production methods, analyzing ingredient sourcing, and attempting to understand the management systems that enabled such efficient global coordination. These efforts provided valuable intelligence about American industrial capabilities that extended far beyond beverage production. The financial implications of the Coca-Cola operation also astounded Italian economic analysts, who calculated that the company was spending millions of dollars monthly on what amounted to military morale support. The willingness of a private corporation to absorb such enormous costs for patriotic, rather than profit motives, suggested an economic system and corporate culture that was fundamentally different from European models. This alignment between private enterprise and national objectives represented a form of economic mobilization that Italian planners had not anticipated or prepared to counter. The technological transfer that occurred through Coca-Cola operations also had strategic implications that concerned Italian military planners. The company's expansion into new territories required training local personnel in American production methods, quality control procedures, and management techniques. This knowledge transfer created cadres of foreign nationals who understood American industrial practices and who could potentially serve as the foundation for post-war economic relationships that would favor American interests. The social dynamics of Coca-Cola consumption among American troops continued to fascinate Italian observers, who noted that the beverage seemed to transcend not only military rank, but also racial and ethnic divisions within American forces. At a time when the American military was still largely segregated, Coca-Cola appeared to be one of the few things that was distributed equally regardless of a soldier's background. This democratic aspect of American military culture, symbolized by equal access to luxury beverages, represented a stark contrast to the rigid hierarchies and ethnic prejudices that characterized Axis forces. The medical research conducted by American military doctors on the effects of Coca-Cola consumption also caught the attention of Italian military physicians who were struggling with their own problems of soldier nutrition and morale. American studies suggested that the beverage's combination of caffeine, sugar, and carbonation provided measurable benefits for alertness, energy, and psychological well-being. These findings implied that what Italian analysts had dismissed as frivolous luxury was actually a carefully calculated tool for maintaining military effectiveness. The diplomatic implications of Coca-Cola distribution extended beyond immediate military applications to broader questions of post-war influence and economic relationships. Italian intelligence analysts recognized that the company's global expansion during wartime was creating commercial relationships and brand recognition that would provide significant advantages in post-war markets. The soft drink was becoming a symbol of American culture and values that would influence consumer preferences and political attitudes long after the fighting ended. As 1944 dawned and the tide of war continued to turn against the Axis powers, the psychological impact of American abundance became increasingly demoralizing for Italian forces and civilians alike. The contrast between enemy soldiers enjoying luxury beverages and Italian families struggling to find basic necessities created a stark illustration of the fundamental imbalance between Axis and Allied resources. The Coca-Cola phenomenon had evolved from a military curiosity into a symbol of American industrial supremacy and economic invincibility. But the most staggering revelations about the true scope of the Coca-Cola operation were yet to come, as Italian intelligence began to uncover evidence of production and distribution numbers that would ultimately redefine their understanding of American capabilities and forever change their perception of what was possible in modern industrial warfare. The final intelligence report that crossed Colonel Alessandro Moretti's desk in the spring of 1945 contained numbers so staggering that he initially assumed it was a typographical error. Agent Falco, now operating from a displaced persons camp in northern Italy following the collapse of German resistance, had somehow obtained access to internal Coca-Cola company documents that revealed the true magnitude of their wartime operation. The figure that made Moretti's hands tremble as he held the decoded message was almost incomprehensible. 10 billion bottles. 10 billion bottles of Coca-Cola had been produced and distributed to American forces during the course of the war, a number so vast that it represented more than 60 bottles for every American serviceman who had worn a uniform. To put this achievement in perspective, Moretti calculated that if every bottle were placed end-to-end, they would stretch from Rome to New York and back again 3 times over. The glass alone represented enough raw material to build a small city, while the sugar content could have fed his entire intelligence division for decades. Yet the Americans had treated this massive expenditure of resources as a routine business expense, a cost of maintaining morale that was as essential as ammunition or medical supplies. The human stories behind these astronomical numbers painted a picture of American abundance that seemed almost mythological to European observers who had endured years of rationing and scarcity. Agent Falco's final reports described American soldiers who had consumed hundreds of bottles during their service, treating the beverage not as a rare luxury, but as a daily necessity. Some veterans had kept detailed personal records of their Coca-Cola consumption, creating informal statistics that rivaled military service records in their precision and completeness. The global infrastructure that had made this achievement possible represented one of the most remarkable logistical accomplishments in human history. By war's end, the Coca-Cola Company had established 64 bottling plants in locations ranging from the frozen airfields of Alaska to the steaming jungles of New Guinea. These facilities, many of them built under enemy fire and operated by civilian volunteers, had produced beverages under conditions that would have challenged the most experienced military engineers. The company had essentially created the world's first truly global manufacturing network, using the exigencies of war to expand into markets that would have taken generations to penetrate under normal circumstances. The technological innovations developed during this expansion had revolutionized not just beverage production, but industrial manufacturing in general. The portable bottling equipment designed for military use had applications in civilian production that would transform post-war manufacturing. The water purification systems developed for desert and jungle operations would later be used in disaster relief and development projects around the world. The refrigeration technologies that kept Coca-Cola cold in tropical heat would find applications in medical storage and food preservation that would save countless lives in the decades following the war. The economic implications of the 10 billion bottle achievement were staggering in their scope and significance. The Coca-Cola Company had spent an estimated $50 million on their wartime military program, a sum that represented more than the entire gross domestic product of many small nations. Yet this expenditure had been treated as an investment in American morale and global expansion, rather than a charitable contribution to the war effort. The company's leadership understood that the relationships and brand recognition built during wartime would provide enormous commercial advantages in the post-war world. The psychological warfare value of this massive distribution network had proven more effective than many traditional propaganda campaigns. Every bottle consumed by an American soldier was a reminder of the industrial capacity and economic abundance that supported the Allied cause. More importantly, every bottle shared with Allied forces or offered to former enemies served as a tangible demonstration of American generosity and prosperity. The soft drink had become an ambassador for American values that was more persuasive than any political speech or military demonstration. The cultural transformation that occurred through Coca-Cola distribution had lasting implications that extended far beyond the immediate military context. American soldiers had carried their taste for the beverage to every corner of the globe, creating demand in markets where the product had been unknown before the war. Local populations who had been introduced to Coca-Cola through contact with American forces became potential customers for post-war expansion, providing the company with a global customer base that had been built through military rather than commercial channels. The diplomatic consequences of the Coca-Cola operation were equally significant, as the beverage had become a symbol of American friendship and alliance that transcended language and cultural barriers. Resistance fighters in occupied Europe had requested Coca-Cola as proof of American commitment to liberation, while Allied forces had used the drink as a tool for building relationships with local populations. The soft drink had become a form of cultural currency that facilitated cooperation and understanding between American forces and their international partners. The medical research conducted during the war on the effects of Coca-Cola consumption had produced findings that would influence military nutrition policies for decades. Studies showed that the beverage's combination of caffeine, sugar, and carbonation provided measurable benefits for alertness, energy, and psychological well-being under combat conditions. These discoveries led to the development of specialized energy drinks and nutritional supplements that would become standard components of military rations in future conflicts. The environmental challenges overcome during the global Coca-Cola operation had pushed engineering capabilities to new limits and produced innovations that would have civilian applications for generations. The company had developed production systems that could operate efficiently in climates ranging from Arctic tundra to tropical rainforest, using local water sources and improvised equipment to maintain consistent quality standards. These technological solutions would later be adapted for humanitarian relief operations, development projects, and commercial expansion into challenging markets around the world. The security measures required to protect the vast Coca-Cola distribution network had created a private security apparatus that rivaled many national intelligence services in its scope and sophistication. The company had developed procedures for protecting production facilities, securing transportation routes, and preventing sabotage that would influence corporate security practices for decades. The experience gained in operating under wartime conditions had prepared the company for expansion into politically unstable regions where security concerns would be paramount. The quality control standards maintained throughout the global operation had demonstrated American industrial capabilities that impressed even hostile observers. Despite operating in primitive conditions with improvised equipment and hastily trained personnel, the company had maintained taste, carbonation, and purity standards that matched peacetime production. This achievement suggested manufacturing capabilities and management systems that had obvious applications to military equipment production and post-war commercial expansion. The social impact of Coca-Cola distribution among American forces had created cultural changes that would influence military traditions for generations. The beverage had become associated with American military culture in ways that transcended its commercial origins, serving as a symbol of home, comfort, and shared experience that united soldiers from different backgrounds and regions. Veterans would carry these associations into civilian life, creating a customer base that would remain loyal to the brand for decades after the war ended. The intelligence value of the global Coca-Cola network had provided American forces with unprecedented access to information about local conditions, political situations, and economic opportunities in regions around the world. Company personnel operating in foreign countries had served as informal intelligence gatherers, providing reports on everything from transportation infrastructure to political attitudes that supplemented official military intelligence. This information would prove valuable in post-war planning and commercial expansion efforts. The technological transfer that occurred through Coca-Cola operations had created lasting relationships between American industry and foreign partners that would influence international commerce for decades. The training provided to local personnel in American production methods, quality control procedures, and management techniques had created cadres of foreign nationals who understood American business practices and could serve as partners in post-war expansion efforts. The propaganda impact of the 10 billion bottle achievement extended far beyond its immediate military applications to broader questions of American credibility and influence. The ability to maintain luxury beverage production while simultaneously supporting a global war effort demonstrated industrial capabilities that challenged fundamental assumptions about capitalist economics and democratic governance. Enemy populations, who had been told that American society was weak and decadent, were forced to confront evidence of abundance and efficiency that contradicted their government's propaganda. The post-war implications of the Coca-Cola operation were already becoming apparent as the conflict drew to a close. The company's global network of bottling plants and distribution systems provided a foundation for commercial expansion that would make Coca-Cola one of the world's first truly multinational corporations. The brand recognition and customer loyalty built through military distribution would translate into commercial success that would last for generations. The veterans, who had consumed billions of bottles during their military service, would return home with tastes and expectations that would drive demand for international products and experiences. Their exposure to Coca-Cola as a symbol of American abundance and quality would influence consumer preferences and brand loyalties that would shape American commercial culture in the post-war era. The soft drink had become more than a beverage. It was a symbol of American prosperity and technological achievement that would influence global perceptions of American culture for decades. The lessons learned from the Coca-Cola operation would influence American military planning and corporate strategy for generations. The success of the program demonstrated the value of maintaining soldier morale through familiar comforts, the importance of industrial flexibility in wartime production, and the potential for commercial enterprises to support military objectives while advancing their own interests. These insights would shape American approaches to future conflicts and international expansion efforts. The final irony of the Italian intelligence investigation into the Coca-Cola phenomenon was that their detailed analysis of American abundance had contributed to their own demoralization and ultimate defeat. The evidence they had gathered of enemy capabilities and resources had painted a picture of industrial supremacy that made continued resistance seem futile. The 10 billion bottles had become a symbol not just of American prosperity, but of the fundamental imbalance between Axis and Allied capabilities that made ultimate victory impossible. As Colonel Moretti filed his final report on the Coca-Cola operation in the summer of 1945, he reflected on the transformation that had occurred in his understanding of American society and capabilities. What had begun as curiosity about enemy luxury consumption had evolved into a comprehensive study of industrial capacity, logistical efficiency, and cultural power that revealed the true sources of American strength. The soft drink that had initially seemed like frivolous waste had proven to be a symbol of the abundance, innovation, and organizational capability that had ultimately determined the outcome of the war. The story of Italian spies discovering the scope of Coca-Cola's wartime operation ultimately became a story about the power of abundance to shape perceptions and influence outcomes in ways that traditional military force could not achieve. The 10 billion bottles represented more than successful logistics or effective marketing. They symbolized a society that could simultaneously wage global war and maintain civilian comforts, that could treat luxury as necessity and still emerge victorious against enemies who had sacrificed everything for military efficiency. The legacy of this remarkable achievement would extend far beyond the immediate context of World War II to influence global commerce, international relations, and cultural exchange for generations. The Coca-Cola Company's wartime expansion had created the template for multinational corporate operations that would define the post-war global economy. The brand recognition and customer loyalty built through military distribution would provide the foundation for commercial success that would make Coca-Cola one of the most recognizable symbols of American culture around the world. In the end, the Italian spies, who had been shocked by the scope of American Coca-Cola distribution, had witnessed more than a logistical achievement. They had observed the birth of modern global commerce and the demonstration of soft power that would influence international relationships for decades to come. The 10 billion bottles had proven that abundance could be as powerful as armies, that culture could be as influential as conquest, and that the simple act of sharing a familiar beverage could build bridges between nations and create lasting bonds between former enemies. The fizzy drink that had seemed so frivolous to European observers had become a symbol of American values and capabilities that would outlast the military victory it had helped to achieve, creating a legacy of cultural influence and commercial success that would define America's role in the post-war world for generations to come.